We're really lucky to have Minnie Hahn with us here this afternoon. And I always ask, what's something I could say about you other than all her wonderful educational background from Kansas State University. She also has, her master's is from there. And so she has had a trowel in her hand forever, she said. But her funny thing, she told me, was, you can say I'm a crazy cat lady. Now, it gets even better, because then she shared with me that cat sound is her ringtone on her phone. And she says it's a hoot when you're in Walmart or somewhere and your phone goes off, and people are like, where's that cat? And she's like, I don't know, where's that cat? So we're certainly glad to have you this afternoon.
Absolutely. And I'm going to try and do this without the mic. We're going to see. Can you all hear me? Am I loud enough that you in the back can hear me? We're good? Okay. I was like, I'll use my teacher voice. I actually was a teacher for quite some time in Kansas City area, so I've got that down pat. So if I'm not loud enough, just kind of wave at me and I'll speak up a little bit more. So today, what I'd like to present to you all are sort of the design principles of home landscaping. So one of those things is that home landscaping can be overwhelming. You come into your yard and you have a few plants that you like, and you start to think about the process and what all it takes to make that landscape kind of gel together. And a lot of times it's just too much at once. So what I want to do is kind of break it down and help you guys look at the different aspects. We're not going to get into a specific design style. What I'm going to speak with you about is what I call the 101s. So these are the basic design principles and really what you want to look for as you're doing your designs. My email is up there on the screen, so if you would like to write that down, take a picture of it, whatever. If you want a copy of the notes from the presentation, just email me and let me know, and I can send you a copy of the notes. There won't be any pictures on it because it makes the file too big, but it will be the notes. Oh, it's frozen. Did it go? Something happened. There we go. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look at are those basics of objectives. So why is it that we want to design a landscape? What is it about our spaces? What do we want to use them for? So one of the things that we do need to consider first and foremost is what our needs and desires are for that space. Is it going to be an entertainment space? Is it going to be a relaxation space? And if it's going to be a combination space where you have those things happening at one time, how do you separate those and how do you treat those spaces and create those unique rooms? So, start by asking those questions. Who's going to use this space? What is it going to be used for? And when are you going to be using that space? This is really critical because if you are only using the space in the summertime, you're going to take a different approach than if you're planning on using it year-round. So that is definitely something you want to consider. The key to this is to get your ideas straight and to do planning up front. Pinterest is a great tool to use. Go onto Pinterest, pin those landscapes that you really like, kind of come up with an idea board, and get that concept down of what it is that you want to see. The main thing that I like to do whenever I'm thinking of landscaping is to treat that outdoor space as if it's a room. So your trees, they're going to be your ceiling. Your shrubs are going to be your walls, and obviously those walls are going to be your wallpaper, your window treatments, and those type of things. I even like to think of shrubs as the furniture. So if you think of decorating a room and you have a sofa, you want to flank it with some end tables. On those end tables, you like to add your lamps and those type of things. So treat it as if you're decorating a room, and it really kind of comes together a little bit more smoothly. Then your ground surface, that is going to be your floor. So your grass is your carpet, Your patios are going to be your throw rugs and those type of concepts. So think of it in that manner, and it's really going to help you to design that space and to tackle it in something that's very familiar. Our basic principles, these are the overarching ideas that run through all the landscape. So these principles I'm going to get into in a little bit of detail, but there's simplicity, balance, focal point, rhythm and line, scale and proportion, and then tying it all together is a principle called unity. So when we speak of simplicity, this is something that if you are a gardener who loves to collect plants, this is a hard concept. This is very difficult because you have, I love this plant and I love this one and I love this one, and so you've got your collection. So you have that garden-esque type collection. Simplicity is going away from that and bringing it back down to a consistent plant palette. So it's going to be those repeated elements throughout the space. I'm not saying you can't have your favorite shrub Gertrude over in the corner, but you need to make sure that you have that simplicity so that you're not just one off of each thing. So simplicity is those repeated elements throughout the landscape. A lot of times we achieve that with mass plantings. So if you've been to Garland Gardens, you've seen our mass plantings of azaleas. You've also seen where we have kind of the one-offs where it'll be polka dots throughout there. It gets a little bit distracting. And then groupings of those plants that are of the same color. So even if you have those one-offs, if you have those groupings of color, it does help to bring that simplicity into play, kind of make everything gel a little bit better. Gently curved lines. You don't want it to look like somebody with a drunken marker has run through your yard. So you want it to just be these nice swooping gentle lines like you would see in nature. That's a very important aspect. If it gets too busy with the bed lines, then you really create kind of this overly exaggerated, cartoony looking scenario. So simplicity, we've got our boxwood shrubs, we've got some loropetalum, and then a crepe myrtle in the background. This is simplicity on a porch. Have those repeated color palettes and that very simple pot designs that are reflected. So same color palette, kind of continuing that. And then this is simplicity with color. You have multiple different textures, but you have that simplicity with the green color being carried throughout. Would you say this is a simple landscape? No. No. So some of the things that happen with this is it's really busy. This is right next to a road, and it's something, you know, you really do just want to avoid that. That is great in very small areas, but not a mass planting. That's not something that we want to see again and again across the front of your yard or the back of your yard in abundance. Balance is the next principle of this landscaping. Each side of the landscape essentially has a visual weight. So what we're looking at with balance, it doesn't have to be mirror images, okay? It can be, but it doesn't have to be. What you want to do is, I always say, if you squint and you see the equal amounts of the globs of green on both sides, or globs of color, you're in a good spot. So you can have symmetrical balance, and that is where you have the mirror image. Symmetrical balance is going to lend itself to a more formal landscaping. It's really going to impose formality. So if you want to make something look more formal, then you're going to use this symmetrical balance. Asymmetrical balance, on the other hand, is when you have balance, but it's a little bit lopsided. You may have different trees, different shrubs, different things like that on the background. The ambient noise is getting pretty loud. Okay, I can hear more background noise than I can hear myself, so we're going to this. When we look at balance, what we're looking at is, again, just those structures and those plantings and the colors on either side. So this is a very, very symmetrical house. So we've got equal weight with windows and doors on both sides, and then equal weight of planting materials. So in the top you can see is symmetrical, it gives you that formality, it's a mirror image on either side. And in the bottom is the asymmetrical balance, where you still have the same plant mass, you still have the same amount of planting, the same heights on both sides, but it's different materials. And so that's where we get those two different forms. Most of us do not have homes that are in that colonial style or that very symmetrical style. So asymmetrical is going to lend itself better to home landscaping in most cases. Now, of course, if you do have a colonial style home, that symmetrical landscape looks fantastic, really brings in that formality and creates that nice approach. So, as you can see, you can get extremely formal with that symmetrical balance and really create some hard lines. These are definite rooms that are created by our shrub hedges. There's no illusion of a room here. That is an actual room that's being created. And then we have another version of this where it still is symmetrical with a little bit of asymmetry in it because of the way that the path leads up to the home. But you can see that the same repeating patterns of color on both sides and pretty balanced as far as those go. Asymmetrical balance is in the next two images. Same colors on both sides, repeated plant material, repeated texture, but we also have the weights that differ as far as the distribution of the plants on both sides of the homes. So this is going to give you an idea of what is going to fit your home the best. There are some great tools and resources online that you can actually take a picture of your home and start arranging plant materials in front of it. One of them is free. It's a little bit clunky, hard to use at first, but it's really nice once you learn it. It's called SketchUp. It's what I use. I use the pro version at work so that I can go in and create a three-dimensional model of a space and actually walk through it and see what's going to happen. So that's a really cool tool. It takes a while to learn it. So if you've got time on your hands and you want to learn a new program, that's a great one. What we do want to avoid, though, is this lopsidedness. This is asymmetrical, but it is not balanced. Can anyone see? Could you balance this? Right. Very, very much so. We could easily balance it with some pruning and some selective plant removal. So we don't want to do this because we've got these massive plants that are overtaking one side of the house. Most people don't want to cover up their beautiful home. They want to showcase it and they want to frame it. So, it's one of those things you really want to think about what your intent is. Focal point is extremely important, especially if you have a large space for wayfinding. For smaller spaces, what it does is it's to create sort of a art piece or an attractive point, something that lets your eye rest. So when you are looking at a landscape, your eye, you're what's called actively viewing. So your eye is traveling through the landscape, looking at the different plant materials, and it's looking for somewhere to stop. So what the focal point does is it gives your eye that goal. Most front landscapes, you're going to use the door. You want to direct people to your door and let them know where it is. One of the things that I find very interesting about Garland Woodland Gardens is the first time I went there, I drove past the front entry 3 times before I figured out where it was. Because there was no focal point. We didn't have the arbors at that point. Somebody was smoking on the patio, so I just thought it was the back break room area. Had no idea. Finally found my way up. I was through this wandering garden and I felt like I was coming in the back entrance of something. And it was just very awkward. So when you create a focal point for your entry, you're welcoming people to your home. Now if you're like me and you're more of a recluse, yeah, make it hidden. Make it hard. Oh yeah, you wanna solicit something? Sell me some pots and pans or a vacuum? Good luck finding my door. So the focal point is going to be created in a multitude of ways. One of the ways that you can do that is with a specimen plant. So let's say you have a spectacular Japanese maple. That can be your focal point. Statuary, a fountain, an arbor, any of those things can be a focal point. What the main goal of this is, again, is to lead your eye to a resting point. So when you're creating your focal point, it doesn't have to be a traditional garden space. Like we see this outdoor kitchen, which I think is pretty spectacular, and the fireplace, that's the focal point in this one. So it's actually a piece of architecture. In the lower one, the tree is used to guide the eye right up to that front door. So the differences with the patterning on the sidewalk, the planting materials, and then the way that tree already arched over, these are eye directly to the door. What you don't want to do is something like this, where you're not really sure what you're looking at. Should I be looking at the elephant ear, the crepe myrtle? What am I looking at? Am I looking at the big rock in front? This is very busy. It's hard to find a place for your eye to rest, and most people don't like to look at that picture for very long. It's a little bit uncomfortable. That's actually from a local landscape place in Kansas City, so I love to use it and kind of make fun of them. Rhythm and line is another element that we have that is going to be used in that landscape that will lend itself to this idea of creating sort of this unified landscape. So this is that idea of repeating those elements throughout your landscape. So repeated plant material, repeated colors, repeated texture, also patterns, and your bed lines. These all play into this. So all of those things with that repetition and those lines help you to define your spaces. Think of this as the pattern on your wallpaper or the pattern on your carpet. So this is what we are essentially decorating with. This can be the color of the flower and the arrangement of those flowers, or it could even be a hardscaping material. So this is very strong rhythm and line. You can see the repeated elements as far as the spacing on the stepping stones go. Very hard lines that outline this front entry patio. And then again, the plants have that very linear shape to them. Now that to me is rhythm and line to the nth degree. So we've got like very, very structured, very architectural, not only in the design itself, but then also in the plantings. You can also achieve rhythm and line with these gently sweeping beds. So again, we have this rhythm and line. That's from longwood. So that's rhythm and line with the different plant materials, and then creating those repeating color patterns. As you look onto those into the distance in the horizon, you can see the reds repeating, the blues repeating, the pinks and the oranges. So all of those plant materials are there, and they're present throughout that landscape. Again, we can have a naturalized setting that has rhythm and line. So again, we have these green pieces that are repeated. The texture of the foliage is that repetition in this instance. And then we have those swooping lines that are created by the branches, as well as the water and the rock. Scale and proportion is important for comfort. So when we look at comfort and our level of comfort in a space, scale and proportion has a lot to do with what creates that. If you walk into a building like, for example, a grand church, or we'll just say the Anthony Chapel because it's right there on property, the scale is out of proportion to make you feel awe. So that's something that you can use to your advantage, and you can also use it to kind of make a space more intimate or to make it more grand of a grand gesture. So one of the rules that we use for residential landscaping is your plants shouldn't be so large that they make you feel uncomfortable. So the height of your foundation plantings, the rule of thumb is it should be 2/3 of the height of the eave. The corner plantings, whenever you're using those, again, should be lower than the eave, and that's to draw that attention to the front of your house and to the corners of your house, to frame it, not to hide it. So foundation plantings under the height of the window. If they're going past your window, your plants are too large for the space, you can either trim them back or you can move them. And then the eave, the corner plantings, the same idea. Now, if you're bringing something out in front of your house as a specimen planting, like a Japanese maple or a magnolia, just make sure that it's far enough away from your house as to not actually touch your roof line. So that's one of the key things, is you don't want it to touch your home. And again, in most instances, the idea of this landscape is to complement your home, not to hide it. So unless you're just really wanting to be a hermit like me, you'll really want to make that effort to keep the plants from actually overwhelming your home structure itself. So if you do have large trees or shrubs that you're going to use, you want to use them away from the home. You don't want to use them immediately adjacent. So an idea here is we've got this grand tree that's in front of this house. Again, you see the similar shape to this tree as we saw in a previous slide, where it's directing you right up to that front door. And the scale of the plants that are around the house are below the windows. They're below the porch line in this instance. Anything that's around the home itself is kept cut back and kept very neat and clean. And in this instance, the trees, large trees, are actually framing the home. So they're not immediately against the home. You can see on the eaves. Oh yeah, my laser pointer will not work on a TV. You can see on the corners, you've got that 2/3 height where you do have shrubs that are immediately adjacent to the house. So those are 2 examples of different styles. The foundation plantings are cut back so that they're under the windows, they're not overwhelming, and it doesn't make it feel overgrown. Same thing in this instance. Tree is planted so that it will not, even at mature height, touch the house. And then we have these. A little bit overwhelming. Okay, so yes, in a dream world, that would be my house. Hide from those solicitors with vacuum cleaners, I don't know. But in these instances, this is something that can also be fixed. So these are all things that you can go through and do some trimming and do some shaping and get these back under control. This isn't a lost cause here, but you do want to make sure that if these things are grown up like that, that you are getting them back under control. So the main purpose of our landscaping is to create that interest. So as we're creating interest, we have to be very mindful of not getting carried away with our favorite plant materials and just going crazy with a bunch of different varieties. I know I last year got extremely obsessed with the deciduous azaleas because they all looked spectacular. And I went to River Valley Nursery and I wanted to buy one of every single kind for my house. I talked myself down to just one. So I did end up getting one, but it's one of those that is going to be a specimen plant in my landscape. So I want to make sure that if I'm using something as a specimen plant, that I have just that one and that I'm drawing that attention to it and not overwhelming my yard with 17 different varieties that are different colors just because I love them. The other thing that helps to create interest is the idea of either actual or implied fire and water. This is something that can easily be done with a fire pit or one of those, I have just a bowl at my house. It's one of those above ground that you just put some wood in it and burn it. Pretty nice little fire pit. And that's either present or represented. A bird bath can be water in your garden. You don't have to actually have a pond. You can have implied water with a dry creek bed. It's those different elements that you can bring into play that don't necessarily need to be the actual element itself, but it does help to create comfort. Varying your ground surface materials, again, treating things as if they are your main hallway with a rug in it. Or I've got my dining room space with its nice table and nice chairs in there to help create that idea of these rooms, keeping your ground materials different as you move through the space and creating, we call it, primary, secondary, and tertiary pathways. So your primary pathway is going to be the main walk out into your landscape. Your secondary pathway could be the stepping stone path, so maybe you go from a sidewalk to a stepping stone, and then your tertiary is a bench that's off to the side. So think about those elements as you're moving through. You also want to make sure that your color palette is consistent and that you're going to create some mystery with partially obscured areas. So this is one of those things that as you move through a landscape, we're going to compare it to driving down the highway on I-70 through Kansas. The highway is straight, it's flat, it's boring, people fall asleep all the time, it's windy, it's awful. And then you've got 270 out here, or 71 even out here coming down into Arkansas. 71 is more comparable. beautiful vistas, curves in the road, you're waiting to see what's around the next bend. You can't see what's ahead of you completely, so that that sense of mystery makes you want to travel further and keeps you from getting bored. So it's one of those things that it's creating that mystery with partially obscured views. You want to turn the corner and see what's around it. You want to partially hide your bench area with the planting. It's this idea that there's something around the corner, this idea of exploration, this idea, I want to see what's back there. This is really cool, what's just around the corner. It's that idea of creating that mystery and mystique and really creating something of interest. So, all of these ideas can come together to create a pretty spectacular landscape in your backyard. The other thing that you do want to consider is seasonal interest. One of the key points is to select plant materials that I call anchor plant materials. So these are going to be your evergreens. These are going to be those things that are there year long. It doesn't necessarily have to be an evergreen. It could be a tree with a great structure. So it's something that creates that interest. You also want to make sure that you're mindful of when your plants are blooming. You don't necessarily want one area of your yard looking spectacular at one time of the year and then another. You want to kind of space it out and keep that interest flowing throughout the season. And then another thing that is recommended is to limit the space that annuals take up in your yard, just to create, kind of limit those bare spots. Now, we have that climate that it's great. We can actually get away with planting quite a bit of things in the winter time, and that are winter annuals, and pull those on through the winter season. So this is one of those gray areas. If you live further north, or if you have a difficult time in your yard, I would recommend that you keep the annuals to a minimum, but also we can get away with that here. So it's this idea of creating those anchor plants. So you can see the anchor plants of the evergreens right up against the house. There are masses of perennials that are in the front that will die back down to the ground. So there will be some bald spots, but you still have that structure and you still have that interest throughout the seasons. Grasses are another great one for this, because grasses, if you leave them without cutting them, they're going to create that winter interest with the flowers and also with the structure of the grass blade itself. As you're selecting your color, there are a few different rules of thumb. So I've got up here the color wheel. And typically, when you choose colors, you want to choose colors in a theme. You don't want to just choose every color and put them all together at one time. Again, that goes back to that idea of simplicity. So as you're choosing colors, one of the ways that you can get away with using every color is to go through and create almost like a rainbow effect, where your colors gradually blend into one another across your lawn, or you group them in color schemes. So a monochromatic color scheme would be one that has, let's say, all purple. So all of your flowers are going to be purple, so you're just using the green foliage and the purple on the flower. Or you could have an analogous or harmonious color scheme. So that is when you pick the colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. For example, I could go orange, yellow, yellow. Those would be analogous colors. So that's going to create a subdued effect, and you typically pick two primary colors, and then you can use the colors between them. That's as far as you want to go on the color wheel. So if I go from red to orange to yellow, that would be enough. I wouldn't want to go from red all the way to blue. I wouldn't want to go that far around the color wheel. So that's one of those ideas of color theory that kind of help you keep that idea, or those colors, simple to really maintain that idea. And then complementary color schemes. If you really want something to pop, pick two. So those are going to be opposite on the color wheel. For example, yellow and purple. Those are going to pop. So yellow and purple, being those complementary colors, are going to make each other look more bright and stand out even more. So in this, we have the monochromatic with, or the, not the monochromatic, the complementary with our yellows and purples together in this hillside scene. Then we have analogous, where we go from our reds to our yellows. This is more of that analogous idea. And then monochromatic is the last one. So you can see how these different color schemes really allow you to move throughout the landscape and tie all those different features together with those repeating colors. And in certain areas really allow for those colors to pop. If you do notice as well, these plantings are all done in masses. So it's not just one plant, it's usually 5 to 7 that are planted in an area. And I always find this fun, so I threw this in. This is one of those ideas on color theory and how it affects you. So red is the color of passion, orange is energetic and social, yellow is joy and happiness, green is considered to be a relaxing color, blue again is a relaxing color, and it actually has the effect of lowering blood pressure and heart rate. Purple and violet are seen as two separate colors, with one being the mix of the two opposing colors of red and blue, and the other being the pure spectral hue. So when we look at plant material, we're not really going to see a violet plant, it's going to be purple, because we don't just see spectral flowers out there, unless we're having some sort of otherworldly experience. Don't eat those little brown mushrooms, people, I'm telling you. So tying it all together is unity. This is where we have that idea of all of the different pieces and parts being used together. So unity is when this all comes together and you get to decide what your style is. So there are different styles of landscaping, as we've seen throughout. There's the very formal hedge gardens. You can have a cottage garden, perennial borders, Japanese garden styles. All of these are different styles of gardening that you can pull into your space. Do you need to commit to just one style? Absolutely not. You can actually mix and blend styles. That's what's so great about it. You can take elements from each of the different styles that you like and take those and put them together. What you're going to be doing is to make sure that just like in your home, you're designing these spaces for the purpose and intent that you want to use them for. Make them comfortable for you. That's the main goal of landscaping and building your garden spaces. So, finding your style, I always suggest making a top 10 list, going on Pinterest, pulling some images out, and just creating kind of a board. So, you really want to think about those type of things. Are you going to have pets in your garden? This is a key thing. We have a lot of toxic plants in Arkansas that we can grow. I really want you guys to make sure that you research, if you do have dogs or cats that like to munch on things, what those toxic plants are. Okay, I'm not going to give you an all-inclusive list now, but if you do email me and ask me, I've got a few resources that I can send you on those. That was one thing that was kind of a unique discovery of how many toxic plants we have. So, and using the space is actually going to determine the elements that you include within your space. So if you are trying to create a relaxation space in those areas of contemplation, of course you're going to create a space that has those more soft hues like the blues and the purples and the greens. And you're also going to want to include furniture in your space so that you have somewhere to sit down. Unless you just really like sitting on the ground, then go for it. But that is something that you want to consider. Conversation spaces, these are going to be the more active spaces. You're going to want to use the colors of orange in these spaces and then create a little group seating area with facing seats. If there's dining, you'll obviously want a table. And then you also, if you have an area that you want to use for play, you want to create lawn space that's large enough to use, that's a usable space. So the minimum size for that is typically 15 by 15 for a play space. So you can see quite a few of the different elements that are present here. We've got our conversation pit, lawn space for playing, it's even a little dining space off to the side. Let's say that you do have a very small space that you're working with. I have some tricks and tips that will help you fake it and make that space appear larger. So pretty basic stuff. You're just using texture and you're using color. Warm colors like reds, oranges, and yellows are going to appear closer. Cool colors appear further away. Tall plants at the back, short plants at the front. That actually creates this illusion of a deeper bed. And then you want to create height with the vertical planting. Fine textures are going to appear further away, and coarse textures are going to appear closer. So again, you can create that sort of forced perspective, if you will. So these small spaces have all used that in order to increase the depth of the space and create these ideas of a larger area. So before you select your plant material, you do want to consider your lawn. You want to consider the exposure to sun and think about what plant materials that you want to include. I always recommend doing a quick sketch. And just a reminder as far as what full sun is, 6 hours, part sun, 4 to 6, and shade is less than 4. So when you're looking at those tags on your plants, you know what you're looking for. Also remember your exposure is going to change with seasons. So if you're on the on the north side of your home, you're going to get more light in the summer and less light during the winter. One of the ways that you can do this yourself is to find a plan of your home. I recommend using Garland County GIS. You can actually get an image capture. They have outlines of the plot lines, and most of the time you're going to be able to see quite a bit of detail on that. So when you go to you can just Google Garland County GIS if you live in Garland County, and it will take you to the site, and you pick the interactive, and then make sure that you pick the satellite view. And then you can enter in your street address, and it will zoom in on it. Pretty cool resource. You want to look at the property lines, decide rough bubble diagrams of where stuff is going to go, sketch in your bed lines, and then start to assign plant materials to those spaces. Once you've done this, you've got your spaces defined and you're ready to go. You can either hire somebody to do it or start tackling it as a weekend warrior. And so here are a couple different planting styles. We have curvilinear, and that's a more naturalistic, versus our very rectilinear or linear landscaping that tends to lend itself more to formality. So at Garland, we've been able to do this with tackling what we call the Dogwood Plaza space. So what I started with was a plan, moved into a planting plan, laid out my plants, spaced them correctly, made sure that they were where I wanted them to be, and then I'm going to show you a rehab of in front of the pavilion. So 3 years ago, this is what the pavilion looked like. Our views were completely lost because our plant materials had become too large and too overgrown. So we decided just to go ahead, because a lot of these were junipers, and you cannot cut junipers back without just ruining them. Like once you cut them back to the brown wood, they're not going to grow again unless it's a miracle. Sometimes miracles happen, but not often. So what we did was created a plan, new planting design. We did maintain several of the larger trees and shrubs that were in the area. We reduced them, we brought in our new plant material, and now you can see it today, how it's really opened up the view of the architecture. So we've gone from this sort of hidden view, which was supposed to be glimpses that became overgrown, back to today, where we can celebrate the architecture of the space. Okay, well, that's a wrap. So any questions?
Where did you get all those rocks?
Oh, at Garland?
Yes.
Oh, from all over Arkansas.
Okay, so they're all Arkansas rocks.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I have never seen some of the biggest rocks I've seen.
Yes. So we have quite a few different places that we purchase them from, but yes, they're all local, native rock.
Now, are a lot of the plants native to Arkansas, or are they?
It depends on which garden you're in. So in the children's garden and at the wildflower meadow, we have strictly native species that are there. But throughout the rest of the garden, it's a mix of natives and cultivated varieties.
Well, you do a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Absolutely gorgeous. My granddaughter loves it.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
She does. She loves to play on all the rocks. I'm sorry, I'm out of water.
If you've got a landscape and you're going to be changing styles in different areas of the landscape, how far woodland in another, how much separation needs to be between those two?
Really, it's just about the visual separation. So if you're going real strictly with the styles, most of the time, especially with, like you said, Japanese style and the woodland style, you can blend it pretty easily. So you can kind of increase your formality as you move into that Japanese style space, and it doesn't take away from the experience. So it's just one of those that the struggle comes when you go to something that's extremely formal, like if you have a hedge garden and then you're trying to soften that. But it's just that idea of creating those transition spaces that have that sort of visual boundary. So as long as there's a visual boundary, you can tackle it and accomplish it pretty easily. I like to call those pocket gardens. So you've got like a pocket over here, and just so they have that visual separation. Any more questions today?
Can we show you some of our designs on our phone and you can look at them?
I could look at them.
Suggestions?
Yeah, I could do that today. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much.